Hashanah, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Vov. Our Mishnah starts off by telling us shofar shenistak, a shofar that has a split. We're talking here about a shofar that has a split right through the wall of the shofar, all the way through, not just a partial split. And we're talking about a split which is lengthways, over the entire length of the shofar. There is a machlokas Rashi Tosfos exactly what type of a split we're talking about. Rashi learns that it's completely split into two separate pieces. And if it is two separate pieces, we have a psul, because we have a rule that shofar echad amar Rachmana v'lo shnaim o shloisha shofars. The Torah tells us we have to blow with one shofar and not with two or three different shofars. This split shofar, which is into two completely separate pieces, is like blowing from two shofars, not from one shofar, and therefore it's possible. Tosfos learns that we're not talking about where it's completely split into two different shofars, but we're talking about where it has one split all the way along the length. It's now no longer called a shofar. It's called a piece of a shofar. It's called a broken shofar. It's not a shofar. The definition of a shofar is something which is a whole and one piece, and therefore it's not going to be kosher. And the Mishnah goes on to tell us v'dibkai, and he glued it together. Even in such a case where he glued these two halves together, or he glued the split closed, posel, it's still going to be posel. There's a discussion amongst the Rishonim about how exactly a person glues together a shofar. Because the psul that we mention in our Mishnah here is only talking about a psul where it's completely split all the way along the length from beginning to end. But if a shofar has a split that's not all the way from one end to the other, then even if that split is the majority of the length of the shofar, it is kosher if it's glued together. However, according to the Ramban, it's only going to be kosher if the way it's glued together is that you melt that part of the shofar that's got the split, and you weld together with the actual material of the shofar along the split. You're not using any extraneous materials in order to close it. The Ritva holds that even if you were to buy glue and stick it with glue, not actually part of the shofar itself, it's shaloi b'minoi, not b'minoi, it's still kosher if you glue it together like that. Mishnah continues and tells us, dibek shivrei shofros. If somebody took parts of a shofar, different pieces of a shofar, and he put them together. So for instance, he had a shofar that was completely split in half, and he took glue and he put it all together. Whether we're talking about he glued it b'minoi, where he melted it and fused it together, or shaloi b'minoi, that he took glue and stuck it together, whichever way we're talking about, posel. Why? Because again we come across our rule, shofar echad amar Rachmana v'lo shnaim o shloisha shofars. It's only kosher if you're using one shofar, not if you're using two shofars. And here you're taking two different shofars and putting them together. And that is even if each one of these separate pieces on their own would be a kosher shofar. Because as long as you have a length of a tefach, it's actually a kosher shofar. And you're taking two pieces, which together are two tefachim, putting them together, now it becomes posel, even though when they were separate, they are kosher. There is a man, however, who holds that we're only talking here, the psul in our Mishnah is where each piece individually is not kosher. But were you to have two pieces which are a tefach in length, and on their own would be perfectly kosher shofars, then if you glue them together, they still will remain kosher. Mishnah continues by telling us, nikav ustomoi. If you have a shofar that's got a hole in it, and we're talking here about a hole that is less than half the length of the shofar. If you have a shofar that's got a hole that is more than half of the shofar, then avad, it's possible whatever you do to it. So we're talking here about a smaller hole, a hole that is less than half of the shofar. In ma'akeves hatakiyah, posel. If, after you've plugged up that hole, whether you're talking about the man Omer says you have to plug it up b'minoi, or whether you're talking about the man Omer says you can even plug it up shaloi b'minoi, if it changes the sound of the shofar after you've plugged it up, posel, then it's posel. Whether that change is that you're weakening the sound after it's plugged, or whether that change is that it's now stronger, the sound that comes out of the shofar when it's plugged, it doesn't make a difference, it's posel. Because the plug is no longer bottled to the rest of the shofar, it's actually making a difference. The sound you're hearing is no longer the sound of the shofar, it's the sound of the shofar plus the plug. Says the Mishnah, v'im lav, kosher. But if the sound you're hearing from the shofar is unchanged from after you've put in the plug, from before you had the plug in there, then it's a valid kosher shofar. V'ad kan, Mishnah Vav.